you know, it is, to me, this is not a casual problem. This is what defines my sense of what New York City is. You know, the neighborhood shopping strip, which is produced, despite our focus on the gleaming buildings of Midtown and the financial district and Broadway, it's the neighborhood stores which have produced about 60% of the jobs that we've had during this boom. We cannot afford to be at a place that doesn't allow those businesses to thrive. Now here's the challenge though. You want property values going up. You never want them going down. But we treat that as a proof point of how great things are, and then we whistle down the street. You know, how many times have I heard Mike Bloomberg say, well, higher taxes mean higher property values. When he talks about proof points for how well we're doing, that's one of the measurements. It is a better thing than it going down, but it's creating a real challenge for our communities. And we should do a couple of things. One, we should have a Department of Business Services, Department of Small Business Services that really is on the side of small businesses. Right now, if you go into a small business and ask them what their biggest obstacle is to being a success, very often they say the cost and the taxes, but they also say, boy, oh boy, I get my tail kicked by the regulatory regime of the city, which does very little to try to make life easier. You have no effort on the part of the city, for example, to coordinate the process that businesses have to go to comply with local laws. You have a process, for example, on dealing with, you know, that you described. Someone wants to get a liquor license. Here on Bleecker Street, they've got to go to a state board to be able to navigate it. Now, I'm offended by the idea about how much of our life is in the control of a state board or an agency. Very often, an unelected one. If you think, if you think about the major land use decisions we've had in the last 10 years, Ground Zero, West Side, Javits, the football stadium, all of them come down to unelected boards and agencies controlled by the state. We should be chafing against that every single day. If we've proven nothing in the last several years, it's that we don't need the adult supervision of Albany, that we've acted like grown-ups in governing our own resources. Yet we require a business like the one you to go through the Byzantine state process. And the final thing that we need to do is realize that part of the way we make small businesses competitive is to have a citywide national health care plan. You know, can I tell you, the level of cost it is to provide health care for a small business is stifling. Stifling. And yet here we are in New York City, in incredible healthcare infrastructure, hospitals, doctors, nurses, clinics. We have already enormous amount of money that we all pay in tax dollars for uninsured workers. Yet we step back and say, that's Albany's problem. That's Washington's problem. Every year when the mayor does his budget proposal, he looks at the big chart and says, this is our healthcare costs, we can't control this, and moves on to something else. We should never say that as residents of the city of New York. And one of the things that we can do that is most profound to help businesses of all sides is take that healthcare money that we're paying and say, look, here's what we're going to do. We are going to provide healthcare. We're going to provide an infrastructure for healthcare. We're going to require workers to get it, because despite what Barack Obama says, you can't have healthcare that everyone is not required to be in. Same way you can't have car insurance only for people who get into car accidents. You've got to have everyone be insured. And that's something that I'm committed to doing. I gave a speech on this not long ago at Abney. I think if we're talking about all of the problems that hold down small businesses, that's the one that holds it down with the most profound pressure. And I want to tell you one other thing on this subject. When we talk about state domination, we are about to pass a congestion pricing plan that is going to tax New York City residents and send the money where? To an unelected state board, with their promise that it's going to work out just fine. Well, I can tell you something, that when Joe Bruno and the state Senate and the state legislature, which has a lot of suburban and rural and upstate members, when they find out about this new pot of money, if you think for a moment that it's going to come back to New York, I have only one thing to say to you. Lottery. The lottery. It never works out the way it's promised.
Pauline?
I promise shorter answers. I apologize.
I'd like to ask you if you'd be willing to commit to supporting two new initiatives. One is a new effort to get the Department of Education to implement the Dignity in All Schools Act, which is a state schools bill that the mayor unfortunately vetoed, the city council overrode. We formed a new coalition called Dignity in Action to try to persuade the mayor to implement that. We're not really optimistic about that, so we're going to mayoral candidates? And secondly, very quickly, if you would be willing to support change in policy on the part of the city of New York with issuance of birth certificates to transgender people who have not gotten sex reassignment surgery. I can share with you the language of that.
The second one I'm unfamiliar with, and I'll be glad I've got an open mind about it. I'd like to see the material. The first one I'm inclined to support. And the only concern I would have is I want to make sure, I feel very strongly that we need to keep mayoral control of our schools. I want the responsibility. I want to take the lumps when things don't go well. I want to have the lines of authority. I want to also make sure that we create a safe environment in our schools for all students, teachers, and administrators. And the only caveat I would make about the first was I want to make sure that it is we, the city, that get the opportunity to enforce the rules. I wouldn't do anything that would outsource it either to the state or some unelected board. But I can tell you something. I do believe that it is a real problem that we have in our schools, creating a safe, tolerant environment for all students. And I mean safe that they should be safe from physical violence, but also safe that they need to have a sense of comfort. We don't realize the responsibility sometimes that we have. That very often that 8-hour window that students are in the school building, those are sometimes the only times in that student's day that they're truly being looked out for, they're truly being protected. If we're going to do it, it has to be protections for all people and transgender people as well.
Thank you so much for all of your leadership on the issue of marriage. I think you've probably been following the situation in Albany where we were able to pass the marriage equality bill in the Assembly. Now we're working on the state Senate trying to flip it to Democratic control. I hadn't previously realized that Glendale and Maspeth were in your district, so I found that very interesting. Stonewall and marriage equality in New York and our very own Sebastian McGuire, who's sitting back here in the back somewhere, we're trying to do a forum in Maspeth. The state assembly member from Maspeth actually voted against the bill. She actually comes up to a story as my assembly member. And the two state senators who represent Maspeth and Glendale, Senator Honorado and Senator Maltese, one's a Republican, one's a Democrat, both very strongly against our rights. Would you be willing to work with us on this, try to do something in the district? Because you stood up for us when nobody else is willing to stand up. And if you'd come out there, I think it'd be very helpful to try to change some opinions, show that we do have some elected officials behind us that help support us.
Well, the answer is yes. I think you realize now something that I try to explain to people, in that I have Senator Padovan represents my district and Senator Maltese represents my district. There's this notion that I come from this very left-leaning district, and we have some very progressive citizens in that district, but we have, frankly, some elected officials who represent that area who I think are discordant with where a lot of the people are. Make no mistake about it, gaining control of the state Senate is important, but we also should realize there are some Democrats that we need to work with as well, and I'll be glad to contribute any way that I can.
A couple more?
Sure.
John, Mark.
Hi, I just thank you for coming to Stonewall today, and thank you for standing up for the transgender community. I wanted to thank you for getting a perfect score on the Humane Society of the United States Congressional Scorecard, which is about animal protection issues. I wanted to point out that you and Bill Thompson and Councilmember Avella are all very supportive of animal issues. Unfortunately, the Speaker of the City Council is hostile to issues involving the protection of animals. I wanted to ask you if you would commit to making this a campaign issue in 2009 if you decide to run for mayor.
Well, look,
Can I just say,
sure.
there are 217,000 members of the Humane Society in New York City. So.
Right.